All right, this is Tiara speaking. Welcome back, everyone. This next session is a thoughtful examination of programmatic accessibility. I am delighted to welcome Sara Hendren, a design researcher, writer, filmmaker, and professor at Northeastern University. She is author of What Can a Body Do? How We Meet the Built World, which explores the places where disability shows up in design at all scales. It was named one of the best books of 2020 by NPR and won the 2021 Science and Society Journalism Book Prize. Sara has a plethora of other accolades that I could speak about at length, but I'm eager to turn the floor over to her so that we can learn from the many valuable insights that she's going to share with us today. Sara, we are so honored to have you join us. Everyone, please welcome Sara Hendren.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Tiara. Thank you to Stephen, and thank you indeed to Kaya and Rolando and Venkatesh and Meg for so many interesting insights this morning about our shared field of design and technology and our shared commitment to accessibility. I'm really glad that Tiara and Stephen asked me to talk about something close to my heart, which is inclusive programming. And in this way, we're shifting the lens a little bit to not just tools and technologies, but what we do in disability to create encounters and scenarios and modes of communication that are themselves accessible. And so we might think of these broadly as designed, but they take a lot of different constituent parts and a lot of different kind of players who bring them to life. So I'm going to show you and describe images from a bunch of different projects today, many of which are designed for neurocognitive disabilities and developmental disabilities. I'm the mother of a 19-year-old with Down syndrome. I have three children, and he's my eldest. This is something that's really important to me and that I've watched closely for the last 2 decades. But also, I want you to just notice the kind of experimental spirit of each of these programs, to see them as kind of pilots and prototypes, even in many cases, some of which are one-offs, like sort of small experiments from which I think a lot of us can learn. And we can talk maybe afterwards about the difference between technologies that are intended to scale and projects that are meant to be small, localized, highly specific. So I've got this opening slide here that says building inclusive programs, and I've got featured on it an image from Unified Sports, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but it's got athletes of different abilities on a football field, and two of them are in the foreground embracing, and one is holding a football. So next slide, please, Stephen. So this is how I want to use our time today, just focusing on these four aspects of accessible programming. The top says agenda. You'll see in these four bullet points that none of them says accessibility specifically, even though each of these is about access and disability. And I chose these topics on purpose to just show that disability is often connected to coalitions of interest in adjacent fields. So the first is about time as a design tool, so thinking about our time as a civic matter generally. The second is innovation in aging well, so aging as, of course, a larger part of disability, broadly speaking, but also with its own concerns. Investments in the arts and culture sectors, which I think is so important and is so beautifully wed to disability in some of my favorite projects, and the future of food and sort of climate concerns around food. That each of these I find is creatively reimagined and shaped in part by interests in access woven together with those ideas. So next slide, please. I've got an image here of a nursing home in the Netherlands, in Weesp, the Netherlands. That's Weesp. I'm sorry, in Deventer, the Netherlands, and that's at the top of the slide here. Sorry, different town. The image has this Humanitas nursing home, and so on the left, there's 4 stories of housing, and then a wing, kind of in an L shape. On the right, that's set back from the road, and there's a green lawn in front of it. There's this kind of 2-story building there of programming and dining hall and so on. And there's this kind of iron sculpture in the front and some greenery and so on. So this is a nursing home, like other nursing homes that might be familiar to people here in the US, except it is distinctive in a particular way. So this town of Deventer also has a university nearby. And the laws changed in the Netherlands a couple of decades ago to require a greater total minimum footprint, sort of square footage, in each of the residents' living quarters. So, where there had been two different living spaces, they were often combined into one. So, taking a wall out on one of these long hallways of rooms. So, you can imagine combining two spaces into one, combining two spaces into one, combining two spaces into one down a long hallway. What this redesign meant is at the end of those hallways, a small space that could not legally be used to house a resident was left over after the remodel. So they had these small spaces at the end of the hallways. And the nursing home directors were thinking, okay, how could we use this leftover space in a way that enhances the lives of older adults in our care? And they thought, oh, we have this university nearby. University students are always looking for housing. What if we created housing for these university students that we would give them for free in exchange in a kind of barter arrangement for some of their time spent with residents at the nursing home? And so they did this again by a pilot kind of process, starting very small, a few students to see how it would work. And next slide, please. Today, every semester, there are students who live among and share life with these nursing home residents. So I've got an image here of two women, older adults, who are sitting at a table at mealtime, and there's a student who's standing behind them and assisting with something on the table, a jar or something else. And what's interesting, so for a set number of hours every week or month, these students provide assistance where it's wanted, but really more importantly, are sharing life in modes of relationship. And in fact, when I visited this site, the directors there were very eager to tell me that these are not certified programs that are highly formalized with a lot of training and a lot of official, bureaucracy. In fact, they are built of friendship in the most profound way that makes all of our lives worth living. In other words, they didn't want to freight this project with this idea of a project. They wanted to create modes of encounter and, in fact, modes of friendship cross-generationally that would benefit each party. And I love this because it has this, it kind of gets liftoff from some of the mechanics of programs where we're a little bit too worried about everybody's official kind of training and sets free latent friendships that can blossom. So next slide, please. I would call that an example of time as a design tool, using time together as a means for making life worth living. And time shows up elsewhere too, broadly conceived. I've got an image here of a screen grab from a project that ran a few years ago called Speaking Exchange. So there's a teenage boy on the left of this slide who's, being captured like in a Zoom call kind of style exchange with an older adult man on the right side who's in his 60s or 70s. And then in the middle, there is this logo of Speaking Exchange, which is two little kind of thought bubble like quotation marks, one nested inside the other with a multi-directional arrow to show what this is about. So Speaking Exchange was nothing more and nothing less than an arrangement of relationship between older adults living in assisted living outside Chicago and Brazilian teenagers who were seeking to learn English. And what they would do is meet, every week or so to have that kind of colloquial, idiomatic English speaking engagement that both made use of skills that older adults have and are very often underutilized if they're in assisted living and not meeting young people regularly, and then provided this kind of educational enrichment across the world. And I bring this today just to show that it's not actually rocket science. It's not an elaborate or expensive kind of highly technical provision. Instead, it is a kind of keen insight into the ways that relationship, orchestrated well, can create modes of access and ability where programming again creates what makes life worth living, what makes it holistic and beautiful, not merely mechanically more accessible. Next slide, please. The next, as I mentioned before, is unified sports. So I've got that image here of the football field with athletes of different abilities on it in the background, and these two athletes in the foreground embracing one holding a football. On the right, there's a logo of Unified Sports, which is under Special Olympics. So you all may know Special Olympics. You may or may not know Unified Sports, which is an outgrowth of Special Olympics. So whereas Special Olympics, which continues to be a beautiful tradition in the United States, is for athletes with disabilities in particular. Unified sports are league sports in high schools, some middle schools, I think, that bring together athletes with disabilities and without. So in the high school where my children go, there's a basketball league and a track league. And so it is a mixed ability. So half the students with disabilities and half without. And this to me just seems like a beautiful both investment in the culture sector and also this way of spending time together that makes access much more natural, that builds kind of inclusion into very ordinary after school activities. And I include this in part as a kind of time as a design tool feature because, like my son playing basketball, the time rules of the game are a little bit relaxed. And so the kind of access is made by loosening some of the rigidity of ordinary basketball. So, for example, my son Graham would get, instead of one shot at the basket, he would get three shots in a row. So both of the teams would agree that the game still proceeds and everybody wears a uniform and there are referees and all of that, but that around the edges, the time is a little bit more relaxed and it makes the game a little bit more open, a little more elastic. And there's something so elegant and beautiful about this as an idea whose time has come in more ways than one. Next slide, please. One of my favorite uses of ingenious uses of design of time as a design tool is at the Smithsonian institutions in Washington, D.C. So they have 14 or 15 sites around the city, which are free. I hope people know that. An incredible national treasure. But the Smithsonian, in a keen kind of programmatic insight a bunch of years ago, sent out surveys to their constituencies and learned that there were people who were not accessing the museum because of its sensory qualities. So things like very loud noises that come from exhibits or perhaps really dramatic flashing lights or whatever, that it was sensorily overwhelming to some portion of their interested visitors. So, this is where in design, in a studio, we might say, well, what can we do, with the lights themselves or with the sounds themselves? And perhaps they should be turned up or turned down, or we should redesign the exhibit from scratch, or maybe it's audience controlled. And instead, what the Smithsonian decided to do is to open the museum an hour early, one of those sites, one Saturday a month, where before there's general admission, anybody who wants to come an hour early can come. And in that hour, the lights and the sounds are turned way down. And there are ways to access the tactile features of exhibits that tend not to be open. And again, this is wonderful because all you have to do is say that you want to come. You don't need to provide a doctor's note or some kind of evidence of diagnosis, that they've really stripped away the kind of bureaucracy that can get in the way here. And they've offered to use the clock as the way to intervene and make the space more accessible. It's not super expensive. It doesn't require a lot of technical novelty. And I just find that thinking in terms of the clock outside of the dimension of hardware or software is such a beautiful example. Next slide, please. They also provide what some of you may know of as social stories. So these are distributed ahead of time for young people who may have sensory processing challenges, may also need for kind of anxiety and planning purposes to know ahead of time what's going to be coming. So I've got a slide here from one of the pre-visit stories. And so one of the features that they talk about is museum noise. And so I've got a quote here from one of those books that gets distributed. It says, I may hear an echo too. Museums often have walls or floors that are made of stone. This may cause sounds to echo a little. Carpeting here and there softens the sound. So again, it's just this kind of like attention to detail of making the expectation of what's going to come announced ahead of time, and then also to the degree possible, making sensory features more accessible in time, in an hour. Next slide, please. Some of you all probably know of a very famous now 50-year-old art studio in Oakland, California. I've got an image of uh, famous creative growth here on the screen. So if you've been to that big, beautiful studio in Oakland, you might recognize this studio space. So it's a high-ceilinged, big white industrial space. And there is a crowd of a couple dozen people, each holding up a small drawing of mixed abilities. So adults with cognitive and developmental disabilities are the main constituency that creative growth serves, but they also work alongside professional artists who are the kind of facilitators and co-creators in this absolutely beautiful and riotous provision of textiles and paper mache and paint and markers and all the rest. But just an incredible convivial studio making art. What you can't see here is the adjacent gallery that runs and provides, I want to say, 30% of the income stream that supports creative growth. I mean, if you're here today in a nonprofit role, you know that just staying alive for 50 years for a nonprofit is so impressive. The fact that they do this by framing in literal and figurative terms the artwork that is made by the people who come here in a serious way, presenting it in a serious way, cultivating relationships with serious collectors. That is part of how they keep the lights on. And of course, half of the proceeds for those artworks go to the artists themselves. We bought a piece when we were there in April. It was such a thrill to see. But creative growth, I mean, by presenting the work again as serious work without the kind of sentimentality that is sometimes present when we talk about developmental disability, without the kind of patronizing, without a kind of cookie cutter style form of output. There's something I've never seen a group quite like it, though there are similar kinds of outfits around the country. Some of you all know these, but I just want to say that creative growth does a particularly good job of seeing the kind of deep integrity and sophistication of art that comes from all kinds of minds and bodies. You may also know that San Francisco MoMA collected a number of these works and had a show dedicated to celebrating that 50th anniversary. And it was on PBS. You can see some incredible work coming out of there. And then another art kind of effort. Maybe Stephen, you can go to the next slide again. I wrote about this incredible partnership at a day center in Scotland for Harper's Magazine. I can send you the link to that if you'd like to read it. I wrote a long piece, a reported piece about this partnership because again, I've never seen anything like it. Truly, not even creative growth is this model. I've got a slide here that says the Cherry Road Learning Centre, which is outside Edinburgh in Scotland. And I've got an image of the interior here, which has windows across its front wall, and it's got soft furniture, a gray leather couch, and a beautifully painted piano with a garden all over it, and birds and, applique on the windows and artwork and so on. Next slide, please. So what happens at Cherry Road? Cherry Road serves adults with cognitive disabilities. Many of them are people who don't use any kind of verbal or written speech to communicate. So these are not people who tend to be able to work in the community in public. They do require supports for their daily activities. So they come to the Learning Center to do all kinds of things, to swim and to participate in music groups and for beautiful home cooked meals and so on. But one thing that they do is what's called sensory workshop, and that is the kind of going to a room at Cherry Road where a professional artist or pair of artists sets up some immersive, incredibly detailed sensory environment that is tuned just for the interests of that adult. So I've got two images here on this slide to kind of demonstrate this. On the left, the room has been bathed in neon pink light, and there are silvery iridescent streamers hanging down in the middle. There's a motorized wheelchair and a person sitting in it. They're with their back to us. And there's this kind of netted large leaf kind of sculpture that's been affixed to the back of the wheelchair, and there are sparkling lights kind of shining through. So this is an arrangement for the man who's in that wheelchair based on months and months of figuring out what is interesting and beautiful and exciting or scary in a good way to this young man. And there's not a presumption that pink will be the color until it's tried out. These artists will spend a full 50-minute session offering, by means of invitation, is the music that you like, death metal from the 80s, or is it, relaxing, um, like piano? Is it lava lamps and feather boas? Is it a simulated magic show? I visited there several times and I saw these artists go to great lengths to construct a kind of joyful experience without predetermining what would be interesting to each one. So the image on the right, one of the artists, Laura Aldridge, Aldridge, is lying on the floor behind a kind of loose netting, and one of the day residents is lying beside her, and they've both got their arms outstretched, and there are these sparkly lights everywhere. So what's happening is that the artists are creating this sensory space, highly bespoke, in a way that artists do best, because artists are already interested in qualities of light and sound for their own sake, in kind of enigma and strangeness. And I just love this because it's not presuming that each of these residents will be soothed by one person strumming a guitar in a group, and I'm for strumming guitars in groups and when it's enjoyable. It's just that this is something else. This is a kind of commitment to figuring out what's going on in the lively consciousness of a person who's using very subtle cues only, and again, very often very little speech of any kind, to say what they find enjoyable, what they want to learn more about. And again, I've just never seen anything like it. Can you go to the next slide, please? I've just got another image of a sensory workshop where there's a day center resident who's got a costume on with a big pink wig and a mask, and is kind of making the peace sign at the camera lights behind them. And next slide. This is another image of Laura Aldridge, this professional artist, and she's got a bag with water and sparkling sequins and is shining a flashlight through it. And there are residents seated next to her on either side. And they're all just enjoying this kind of quality of light and sound in the dark together. And Laura, again, so Laura, this is sort of like the nursing home in Daventer. Laura is not an art therapist. And I want to be careful here to say that I'm for art therapy in its many forms when it's called for. But what the Scotland Centre is doing is paying artists, so investing in the arts and culture sector, based on whether they, in a foundational sense, understand what's going on here. Do they see these residents as people? Full stop. So they are not actually highly certified or uncertified. They are evaluated as they would be for any other job. Can they do this? Are they interested in these people without the kind of bleeding heart need to therapize them? Again, I'm for therapy and clinicians of all kinds, but this is something else. And I've never seen such a profound commitment to people and the encounters between people, artists who are serious about making art, who want to provide and discover and explore sensory environments with partners. Next slide, please. The last I'm showing you is just an image of a gallery installation of Laura's professional work. So this is all Laura's kind of other professional life where she's making sculptures and kind of 3D installation work that you can see in various gallery shows. In this room, which is kind of bathed in yellow light, there are these ruffled textiles mounted with lights that are hanging at various heights on the wall. Some of them are plugged in and are activated, it looks like, by small colorful balls. There's some kind of installed uh, strange furniture, almost, it looks like, seating areas and so on. So this is abstract work that could be read in lots of ways. The reason I include it is just to say that the exchange that's happening at Cherry Road is genuinely multi-directional. So both the adults are getting this deep investment in whatever it is that makes them come alive and curious, but also the artists are, in their own way, having an encounter with another human being, usually without speech, passing between them, but communicating nonetheless. And the artist's work, you can see, right? If you squint, you can see the influence of those sensory workshops on the kinds of things that Laura presents as a professional. So she is both, she is not doing that one-way therapy kind of provision. She's building a form of friendship over these kind of means and methods, the time, the artifacts, the environments. Next slide, please. I want to just mention Common Roots Farm, which is in the Bay Area of the United States. And this is a farm that employs people with disabilities and without. Common Roots is a model that probably many of you have seen elsewhere, but I raise it here, and I've got two images, one on the left that's got rows of vegetables, and then people all of different abilities standing in a line, working on shoveling and hoeing and weeding and so on. And in the image on the right, there's one of the farmers is using a motorized wheelchair, and he's got on his lap a colander with a bunch of big, beautiful strawberries. And there's a woman standing behind him. They both have on hats and sunglasses and are kind of exulting in the sunshine. I guess I raised this to talk about the future of food itself. So it may be that the future design of accessibility is as often small as it is large and scaled. So very often we talk about design for disability, and we want to give it credence and importance only if it scales in the way that software, with its liquid form of zeros and ones, yes, scales instantaneously and at very wide kind of magnitude. But I want to suggest both for the climate, for localities, for people building relationships, for healthy food and healthy ecosystems, it might be that the future is also federated forms of very small endeavors where embodied, localized work is also really valuable and supports a community. Next slide, please. But the future of food is also perhaps at the same time technical. So if you look at vertical harvest, which I've got a couple of images from here, you'll see the future of food that may be small scale, but also is highly technical in its delivery. So vertical harvest does hydroponic gardens in city centers where you don't have horizontal land to build fields, but you have vertical space to go up. So instead of out, going up. So in the images here on the left, there's this kind of glass and chrome futuristic building of a vertical harvest site in Jackson, Wyoming. And you can see kind of through the windows that there are these vertical rows stacked of hydroponic gardening beds. And on the right, I've got a more medium shot of what that looks like on the interior. So these rows of lettuces that are stacked one on top of the other, and they're kind of overflowing the edges there. So vertical harvest employs people with disabilities and people without to do the harvesting within these kind of temperature controlled and more accessible environments to both provide local fresh food in city centers and especially where there may be food deserts, but also to provide this high quality working environment to the people that they hire. They are expanding to other cities around the United States. I encourage you to look them up. Next slide, please. So here's just an image of a couple of workers from Vertical Harvest, one who's standing behind the other who's seated. They're each carrying big, beautiful cardboard trays of harvested greens. Behind both of them is the interior of Vertical Harvest that has their motto on the back wall. So grow well, eat well, be well. Again, I'm just so excited by the idea that innovation itself is tied up with disability. I think we have to be careful not to let our language slide into a kind of don't forget model where we imagine that inclusion is just about expanding bigger tents to people who may be left out. It is my experience that very often disability is at the forefront of innovation in programming, in design itself, meaning that human dependency, needfulness, interdependence as life worth living, forms of friendship across generation and ability, that's where the creativity lies. So to honor it, we also have to be willing to prototype and to test and experiment without waiting for the kind of scalable good idea to be implemented at scale. No, we have to try small kind of ideas, see if they work, be willing to reverse them if they're not working, but to boldly go forth and I think be a little bit less, afraid of getting every last thing right. So here, in my view, um, and people may disagree on this, we can talk about it in the panel. I think sometimes we can be in our own way by freighting up with process, with a kind of very literal idea of what inclusion requires, of making universal design the kind of all or nothing standard. I think many of our future accessible programs may need to have a lot of grace around them and to get a little lift off from that energy and spark where somebody has an idea and they're not quite sure if it'll work or not. They need the goodwill of the people around them. So I would just encourage us all to be thinking in the most generous way about where good ideas come from and be willing to do that kind of restless, convivial work of prototyping, testing, and experimenting. So last slide, please, Stephen. So I guess I'm just repeating the agenda here in case people want to take up any of these topics in the discussion: time as a design tool, innovation and aging well, investment in the arts and culture sectors, or the future of food. But I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that very wonderful presentation. We are so happy to have you with us today. And I really appreciate the way that you highlighted making our programs more accessible doesn't have to be a very expensive or technical endeavor. So thank you for pointing that out. Your perspective really added a lot of depth to this ongoing conversation that we have been having on accessible design. And on that note, I'm very excited to dig even deeper during our next session on designing for the future, which will begin promptly at 11:15 a.m. after a very short break. We do welcome our audience to stay logged in as we move into our break, and we will see you all back at 11:15 a.m. This would be a great time to grab water or coffee or do whatever it is that you need to do. And again, we'll see you back at 11:15 for our final discussion, and then we will take questions from the audience. Thank you.